Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Podcast powered by First National. I am Adam Powatic, sitting here with Aaron Cameron at the Land and Development Conference. We've got a specialist in the field with us today, Randy Gladman, Managing Director, Colliers Strategy and Consulting, Senior Vice President, Development Advisory. Not only is he known for his long title, he's known for his expertise in the field. He operates in the Toronto, Vancouver markets. We're going to hear about the difficulties, the highs and lows, we'll say it, of both of those markets. But Randy, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So this has got to be your conference of the year. This one that connects most with who you are in your professional life.
Yeah, I really like this conference. The Real Estate Forum is another one that, same place and same organization. Also a really great conference. I don't miss any of this.
My inner social butterfly, I think, connects with the Toronto Forum in December. But
yeah, the Real Estate Forum has more parties in the evenings than this one does.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
it's 2 days too.
Yeah, it's 2 days, so you get to see how they operate hungover the next day.
Yeah. Well, and it was Colliers too that added on a party to the third day, which is historically not been done. So groundbreaking, adding on a third night socializing for around the forum. Anyways,
I'm sure that's not what Colliers wants to be known for.
No.
Added more parties.
Well, maybe we'll jump into that. We're gonna get to Randy's background and then what he's doing. So maybe that part will highlight the other areas of Colliers' expertise. But Randy, let's get into it. How'd you get to where you are?
Well, I actually had a career before real estate. I had been working in New York City in the contemporary art world. I did a master's at NYU in art history, mostly just because I wanted to move to New York. It seemed like a good way to get there. And I worked there for 5 years, and it was really great. But I was in my late 20s, and my friends back home in Toronto were buying nice cars and buying condos and inviting me on ski trips. And I was living in a fifth floor walk-up in Brooklyn with crack files on my stairs and cockroaches in my bathroom, and that was just not possible. So I started really thinking about what else I can do, and even then real estate didn't occur to me. But I had always thought about either going to law school or business school. Made a strange decision. Business school is only 2 years, law school is 3 years, so I went for business school. Came home to Toronto, wound up at U of T Rotman School of Management. And while I was going through first year there, I was enjoying it all, but none of it was really speaking to me. I didn't know if this was going to work. I didn't know what I was going to do afterwards. And then in second year, I took a course that everybody said you had to take, which was real estate development, that was taught by Mitch Goldhar, who is the founder and CEO of Smart Centers. The nickname for the course was Get Rich with Mitch. I really had no idea what real estate development was at the time. It really didn't occur to me, so I really fell into this backwards. But by the end of the first class of that course, right away I knew this was really interesting. This is something I wanted to do. I really liked the project-oriented nature. I like the real-world nature of it. There's certain things in MBA where you could never really point at what it is that you are doing or making. But having come from the art world, which is very material, there was something about real estate that really, meant something to me. Also, my grandfather was a builder. He was already retired by the time I remember, but I heard lots of stories about my grandfather who was a builder. So it all kind of seemed to make sense, and I really liked that course. And at the end of it, Mitch hired me out of the class, and I got a job at Smart Centers. Smart Centers at the time was still running a rotation program, kind of like the way that the banks do it, where you would start and you'd work in all the different functional areas of real estate development. I was in the first group of people to ever go through that at Smart Centers. I think they ran it for 7 or 8 years. There were 13 of us that were hired, and 6 or 7 of us made it past the first year. I wound up there for 7 years. So at the beginning, I did, what did I start in? Budgeting finance. I was really worried that my boss at the time, Owen Parkhill, who's now at Montez, I was really worried that he was going to realize that I don't know my way around an Excel sheet at all. But I somehow faked that one. Then I went into development engineering with a great guy named Tom Bosniak, who's now at Plaza Partners, taught me a lot as well. Then I moved into construction and did a rotation in the construction department, which was really awesome, a lot more fun and a lot more interesting than I had anticipated. Then I did a tour duty in the leasing department, and then finally wound up in planning development management. And while I was there, I really enjoyed it. I did, I think I did really well there. And the first project that I wound up developing on my own was the Walmart in Aurelia. So not many people get to work on I think it was 126,000 square feet or something like that. It's a pretty big first project, but there's lots of support around, lots of really great development managers, a lot of them floating around the conference today. And I just kind of dove into it. At the time, I didn't even know the difference between an LC and a DC. All the language was still really new to me. But I went through and I wound up at Smart Centers for 7 years, from 2006 till 2013. And then around that time, the development of unenclosed shopping centers, that era seemed to be coming to a close. I was ready to do something different.
So what year was that?
That was 2013.
Okay. Yeah. As soon as you said the era of the enclosed shopping mall was kind of ending, I wanted to timestamp it.
Yeah. When I first started at Smart Centers in 2006, if I remember correctly, that year we got 26 Walmart approvals. So that was approval to acquire the land and start the development process. It went down every year. And then in 2012 was the last full year I was there. I think we did one. So the writing was really on the wall. I wasn't sure if Smart Centers was going to be able to pivot, because at the time they were still a very, a one-trick pony. That was what they did. They've very successfully evolved since then, but I wasn't sure. And I was ready to try something else. And TrioVest hired me, and I went to TrioVest, and I was there for, I think, 5 years, and wound up really developing a lot of different things. We did some residential, we did office, there was still more retail, and also had as TrioVest is really known for right now, had a really big book in developing large format industrial. And so I was there for quite a long time, and it was really great. I really enjoyed it. I really loved the team there. And then around 2018, I got a call from Colliers, and my phone, the phone ID was still landlines at the time. It said Colliers. And I was wondering, like, why are brokers calling me? It wasn't a normal thing that I spoke to brokers in the work that I was doing. But that was, part of my misunderstanding about Colliers at the time. And I think a lot of people still have this perception. Colliers is, a brokerage house, and it is, and it's one of the biggest in the world. And it's, I think one of the best, but Colliers also offers a lot of other services as well. And I just wasn't aware of that at the time. And it turned out I was being recruited into the Colliers Project Leaders Division, to start a development advisory practice. So a third-party service delivering development management to owners who are not developers, but own intensification-ready land, and they want to take advantage of it. Maybe they're not going to build it on their own, but they know it's worth more if it was entitled than it is now. And so we started this business. So Colliers was already running this in Vancouver, and had been for a number of years, but it was a pretty small practice. It was a few people only really servicing the Vancouver area. And the goal here was to start a national practice. So that was in 2018. Now it's, 5 years later, and our development advisory now, we have 20 staff. We have offices in Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, and Toronto. And we're working on projects essentially everywhere in Canada that's west of Quebec. We have done a bit of work in Quebec, but in Quebec, you can't really do development unless you have on-the-ground French-speaking Quebecer developers. And, we might do that at some point in the future. But right now, there's a lot of growth still to happen going west. So that's the team. And we've done a lot of really, really cool projects. We've pulled a lot off. We do some building. We've started for private equity company. Last week we started demolition on a 270,000 square foot warehouse that we helped them with the underwriting a couple of years ago. As soon as the acquisition was done, we started the design process and site plan approval. We're now through that whole thing. We managed the tender, and now demolition of the buildings that are on site is there. And a year from now, there'll be tenants in a AAA distribution center. I'm pretty excited.
Industrial goes up fast. That's the nice
beauty
part
of it. Yeah, that's the beauty of it. I mean, that project from acquisition until rent is flowing will be less than the amount of time that some of the high-rise residential in Toronto that we're doing just to get through the entitlement program.
So are you acting as consultant there, or you're doing the development on behalf of the private equity as GC? Like what's the involvement you have?
Yeah, we're not a GC. We're always on the owner side. So when it's time for construction, we operate as the owner's rep,
Okay.
and we manage the tender process. We will procure the GC to come in, and then as the owner's representative, but essentially on the owner side, we'll manage that all through the process. So where we
Just fee based.
we're fee based. Yep, we're entirely fee based. We actually think that's one of our competitive advantages. We don't take an equity position. The owner maintains 100% control of the project. If there's any issues along the way, whether it's economic change or the site the owner decides to sell the site along the way, or if we're not performing very well, which hasn't happened yet. But any of those things, it's a very easy. The owner maintains all control. They can shut the project down. They can sell it. They can move on. And we want to help with all of that. If the owner decides, we're mostly through the zoning program, we can get the value now as if it's fully zoned, in a near zone condition, then we want to help with that too. We just want to do what's right for the owner, and we take a long-term view, and, word gets out that we were really helpful and we helped maximize the value that can be extracted from the land. That's what we do.
So rather than going out and hiring people to have the real estate expertise, why not just engage Colliers and have them do it for you?
That's exactly it. Look, there's development companies out there that do what we do. They do a great job. We respect them. Most of my team, we worked at those companies. They won't hire us. They don't need to. But there's a lot of owners of intensification ready land that are out there that are sophisticated enough to understand that there's more there. Now, they may not be developers. They may not want to take on the construction risk and the market risk. $150 million construction loan doesn't make sense for them. But for them to take on a couple $1 million in a couple years to get the zoning and get the entitlements, that's something that they see the value in, but they don't have the either the capacity or the capability to do it on their own. So they'll bring us on to do that. It's not really easy. Development companies have a hard enough time hiring talent. If you're you're a family office, or you're a pension plan or insurance company that maybe is going to do this once, it's really hard to attract the best people to come and work.
But they don't want to dilute their equity, which is part of the challenge.
Well,
I'm assuming if you're looking for that expertise through other developers, they want to come in and they want a piece of the pie, which you guys just say no, never mind.
Absolutely.
Just pay us the fee, and that's part of the competitive advantage you're talking about.
Exactly. And at the right time, when it makes sense to bring on a partner, once the zoning is done or mostly done, then we want to help do that. We want to help bring that in.
I'll help with that too.
Yeah, we'll help. Well, I mean, that's a great opportunity to bring in brokerage or bring in capital markets to structure a deal. So that's really, where we play. There are certain instances where we go all the way through, where we do definitely do delivery of full projects. And that's where we bring in the Colliers project leaders team. When we get to the point where it's construction delivery, it's time for that. Around the time when we start tendering, we'll bring in Colliers project leaders, which is another division of Colliers Canada. We're in the strategy and consulting division, but project leaders is, a lot of people don't know, but it's the largest third-party owner's rep project manager in Canada. They have 700 employees in that one division. And in the public sector, everybody knows Colliers project leaders. The Parliament buildings in Ottawa are going through I think it's $1 billion 20-year retrofit. That's Colliers project leaders managing that. And they do, civic centers and twin pad arenas, and we're involved in the naturalization of the Don River, and there's just so much there. So when we're moving from what we call like kind of the the pre-development and the entitlement and design phase, and we start to move towards construction, we'll collaborate with Colliers project leaders. We'll bring them in, and they will provide the project manager, and then all the way through from managing the schedule, helping with the procurement of the construction, tracking all the change orders and all the changes that happen during the construction process. Our group stays involved as the main development manager, with the main relationship with the client, and with the municipality and the other stakeholders. But project leaders comes in and they bulk up our team for delivery.
Neat. You're enjoying it. Sounds like I can feel the passion coming out of you. You're having a lot of fun, right?
Look, it's great. I mean, something that I could never have planned was to fall into real estate development in Toronto in 2006. Like, that's a lucky move. I did not plan it. I'm not one of these guys that grew up knowing I wanted to be in real estate. But, like, you guys have been a part of it as well. We've been on this crazy bull run. Looks like there's still many more years ahead. It's been a great industry. And, like when I came out of my MBA in 2006, being a junior guy in a development company isn't the best paid role. Like friends of mine went into the banks and to the management consulting firms and were making, a lot more money than I was. I think I've caught up. And the work that I do now, it's really rewarding and enriching. I really feel like I have a role in building the cities of the future. And I'm really proud of that. I really am.
I guess they didn't call the course "Get Rich Immediately" with Mitch.
No,
it was more "Get Rich Eventually."
By the way, we could have like a Smart Centers
alumni
podcast.
Yeah,
we had Salima Raji was on recently. I'm assuming she worked with you, and then Brad Keese was on earlier today.
He was on my panel earlier today.
So there you go, right? So
you guys missed it, and I missed it too. But there was actually a Smart Centers alumni photo that happened earlier today, but I missed the phone call, so I wasn't part of it. But there's the Smart Centers alumni. There's a lot of really impressive people. Ornella Rakiki is Chief Development Officer at Plaza Partners. Josh Kaufman is Head of Development at Starlight. Brad Keese is Head of Development at Dream Office REIT. Prakash is Chief Investment Officer at Triovest. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. It's a really amazing group of people that I'm really proud to be associated with.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. We see it just by virtue of having guests on
and hearing the backstory.
And next, it seems like it's every third guest is like, oh yeah, worked at Smart Centers. Let's pivot a little bit. We wanted to talk about some of the challenges that Toronto and Vancouver in particular, just focusing on the two cities that you're the most familiar with,
but also the most probably difficult and profitable cities to build in.
I mean, and I want to be careful here. Like, let's just frame this appropriately, right? We all recognize just as members of, just as Canadians, that there's affordability challenge in our two most populous cities, particularly, of course, with just the ability to supply affordable units. And you can define affordable. I'm not talking deep affordable. I'm just talking like affordable that's within the realm of affordability for regular Canadians. And one of the biggest challenges we're having is just delivery of these units. I think you had thrown the number up before we went live of kind of needing 1.5 million units per year to come online to keep up with the demand.
It's not per year. It's the province has said 1.5 million units in the next 10 years in Ontario.
Sorry, apologies. So 1.5 million in the next 10 years, which is 150,000 per year. Right now we're developing around 80 a year or so.
Yeah, in like a best year in Ontario, we've delivered between 80 and 90,000 units. And now we need to deliver 150,000 per year for 10 years. And even then, that's not actually going to solve the problem.
That's just to keep up with the amount of new immigrants and migration that's coming into the city, or permanent residents getting converted. Like it's astounding the amount of demand that's coming into this marketplace. And Vancouver, let's just put them both into the same bucket. How do we fix it? What's your solution?
Look, I mean, we're in the trenches trying to get these things done, and there's just so many headwinds that we have to deal with. And some of them make sense. You want to make sure that these buildings can be serviced properly. You want to make sure the transportation works. But we also run into things at the municipalities that we're pulling our hair out because we don't understand. Like the city leaders are speaking about affordability and how important it is to create more supply. But then when you're dealing with each of these independent review agencies within the approval process itself, it's just resistance after resistance after resistance. With respect to the municipalities and the approval agencies as they're all overworked and understaffed just like everybody else. I mean, the amount of immigration and just general growth in Canada it's crazy. I mean, it's a really great thing. We're all happy that we're growing and that we have great immigration, but we're way behind in providing the amount of homes and taking seriously enough what's really needed here. And so, we deal with it both in Vancouver and in Toronto. There's a really strange kind of, there's like a strange criticism of developers in this world. It's kind of like with lawyers, like people criticize lawyers and make jokes at lawyers' expense. But the fact of the matter is that almost all of us live in houses or multifamily buildings that were developed by developers. We work in office buildings that were developed by developers. We go shopping for our food and our clothes and our essentials in buildings that were developed by developers and built by developers. And the solution to the housing crisis that we have right now is going to be solved by developers. There's lots of aspects to that in developers. It's not, I don't mean just the people that run the development companies. There's the financing and the legal and the architecture. Like I consider, all of those as part of it. But that's going to be the group that is going to solve this problem. And governments at this point, if they really are taking this seriously, should be doing everything they can to collaborate and make it easier and open the gates so that the developers can do what they're very skilled at and what they're very motivated to do and what they're trying really hard to do. But it's a real challenge.
Any you mentioned headwinds. Is there any tailwinds helping out developers right now?
Well, I mean, the tailwinds are just the amount of immigration. There's the demand is just so great. And I will say that it does appear that at both the provincial and the municipal levels, there is a new awareness and awakening to what needs to be what needs to happen. Doug Ford and the Ontario Conservative Party, they're doing a lot of the right moves as far as it goes, as far as land use policy is concerned. There's, a lot of criticisms of the Ford administration for various things, which I either agree with or don't, not related to real estate. But as far as real estate goes, I just think that they're doing the best. They're trying to do the right things. And this is where Bill 23 and some of the other policy comes in, and they've made really hard decisions, and it causes a lot of criticism. But in the end, what they're doing is supportive, and it's definitely a tailwind. At the municipal level, we are seeing changes as well. I've been developing things in Toronto for a number of years, and up until the last municipal election, we had a number of downtown Toronto councillors who were elected, and then their years of leading their wards were in an era before there was a widespread recognition that we're in a supply crisis right now. There was still this idea that it wasn't supply, there were other things. And so you had councillors, the downtown councillors like Councillor Mike Layton and Councillor Cressy and Councillor Wong Tam, who, very smart people who really believed that what they were doing was the right thing for their constituents. And I actually never questioned their integrity on this stuff. I just think that the policies that they were implementing and that they were pushing on were wrong because they did not recognize that there was a supply crisis. And what was really needed was to, make it easier for developers to build the density in transit-oriented areas. All three of those councillors have moved on. They're doing other things. And there's 3 new downtown councillors. And just in the last number of months, we can tell from our conversations with them and other councillors in the Toronto area that these new councillors actually understand, because they came to their power at a time when the supply crisis was already understood. Like, that's one of the reasons why they were elected, was because they were speaking about the need to create more housing and more attainable, more affordable housing. And as a result, they are easier to work with. They seem to get it. They seem to understand that we need density and that certain things are more important than others. Building height and not limiting a tower artificially for some, design reason, that's not more important than providing more homes. And shadows are, I understand shadowing on parks and sensitive infrastructure is one thing, but just creating shadows is not a bad thing on its own. It's really funny because you hear certain times the city is trying to stop shadows and they don't want these shadows to be cast, but at other times they talk about heat island effect and how we need to create shade from trees because otherwise the heat off the asphalt is going to create too much heat in our cities. So it's these kinds of things. And that reflects where the problem still is, because at the elected level and the senior, chief of this, chief of that level, there seems to be a recognition that these things need to change. But then when you're actually in the trenches and you're trying to get things over the line with the various, specialists in the city departments who are reviewing things, it's like really frustrating things come out. And I'm not going to say any names or point to anything in particular, but we just deal with things that are just so frustrating, where comments about things aren't made until the 4th submission, and all of a sudden you have to open it up, or you're required to do a whole other submission because somebody wanted a box, literally just a box drawn on something. There's already a label, but there's not the box there. So you have to go through this process of changing it. And it's, if it was just those little things, that's one thing, but these things all pile up and there's thousands of them.
Is there inconsistency? Is that part of the frustration? I mean, we get it. Just doing a business, when you're doing business, regardless of the motivation or the project, as long as there's some consistency and you know what the ask is, you know what's needed, and every time if you do that, you get the same results. That's one thing. But if it's constantly kind of a moving target, that I can see that it being just, well, the last time this was okay and this time it's not. Is that part of the challenge?
Look, things are moving because policies are changing. So there's that. There's supposed to be a consistent process, at least within a municipality, and you go in for your PAC meeting, your pre-application conference meeting, and you're supposed to present what you're planning on doing. They give you a checklist of what you need for a complete application. You're supposed to move forward. But, it doesn't always work that smoothly. And I've had a situation, this was a number of years ago, where we got that checklist. We started to go through and we made our submission, and then we got the comments, we made the second submission, and on the third submission, somebody in the ecology department in that municipality decided that a herpetology study looking at the breeding of certain species of frogs needed to be done because this was a greenfield development and they needed that study. But of course, they told us that in October, and those studies have to be done between April and November, and it was too late to start the study, so we had to wait until April to go through the study the following year. And why didn't you tell us that? We would have done this from the beginning.
Didn't get to her desk. She's very busy. She's probably overworked. I mean, it's
compounding problem.
It's a compounding problem.
Right? These are just examples.
No, I get it.
We're dealing with this. It's just constant. There's so many things, and a lot of them, sometimes we're dealing with heritage things. And I love the heritage fabric of our cities, and I want to keep the things that are important. But there are often what I consider spurious heritage concerns. These are not actually relevant. If you asked heritage people, they will say it is. But if you ask 1,000 people in Toronto, what's more important than this particular heritage situation, I'm pretty sure 1,000 of them will say just build the housing. And we're dealing with this again and again and again. And we want to be sensitive. We don't want to tear down things that are actually valuable, and most developers aren't even trying to do that. But it's when there are things that come up as being a heritage concern, not even because the building has any heritage aspects to it, but because for some reason it's caught up in a heritage conservation district. This is just a layer of bureaucracy that can slow things down for years. And now instead of this condo being sold when the project is done for $1,200 a foot, it's 2.5 years later because these compounded issues just made it take that much longer. So now it's $1,380 a foot, and somebody's paying for that.
There's not additional developer profit. It's just dead loss to time.
It's not additional developer profit. It just so.
Do you think there's a misunderstanding amongst just regular citizens, members of the communities, that the developers are not the bad guys? That they're really just trying to provide supply, provide parks, create enjoyable communities, provide housing for Canadians. We've had so many developers as guests and consultants like yourself where, yes, there is a profit because it's a capitalist society and they need to make money in order for the business to be successful. But it's not an exorbitant amount of money. It's just enough to keep the lights on and keep moving and pay their staff. Yet there seems to be this constant big bad developer theme. I don't even know where it comes from. I mean, you talked about how basically every interaction you have with the built form is because a developer decided to build it. Yet somehow we're still feeling like the regular citizens think the developer is out there doing something wrong. I don't know what that is. It's really hard for me to put my finger on it.
Look,
and is it changing, do you think?
Well, media feeds it, but
yeah.
Media feeds it. And look, it's really interesting. As Canadians, most of us anyway, believe in capitalism. We participate in capitalism. We want capitalism. We all benefit from it. But at the same time, when people get too rich, it kind of makes us upset. And there are a lot of developers who have made a lot of money. I mean, when you look at the list of the wealthiest Canadians, I don't know what number of it is, but a bunch of them are developers. The thing is that the amount of risk that they're taking it's crazy. I mean, it really is. The amount of things that can go wrong during development, given the long timelines. If you go into business and you are making chairs, you can make 100 chairs and sell 100 chairs and then reinvest that, and then you can make 1,000 chairs. In development, you have to buy the land, Then you have to pay all the consultants and all the municipal fees and all these costs. That takes a year or 2 or 3 or 4 years, and you're carrying the land during that time. Then you have to take on a huge loan from people like you guys to build it, and the building takes a year or 2 or 3 years. So you're many years in, and only then are you able to actually start having revenue coming in. I mean, it's a bit different with condos. The timelines are a bit different, but the amount of things that can go wrong along that timeline, and the amount of capital that has to go in because it's so intensive on that front, it is a very, very risky endeavor. And so therefore, the way the capitalism works is that risk is rewarded. The other thing that's interesting about developers is that there are some developers who, it's hereditary and they inherited it. But most developers that I know, they did this on their own. And it's not like they even had to go to school. Like they didn't have to go to Harvard and get a real estate development degree from Harvard, and you don't have to have this pedigree. You can just be somebody who's smart and has nerve and goes out there and figures out how people are doing it. And as a result, anybody can do it. I mean, anybody can go and buy a piece of land, make their way through the process, raise the capital, and go ahead and build something. And there are plenty of examples of people who have done exactly that. And a lot of them have got very hurt along the way. Especially now with interest rates rising, it's a really tenuous time. But it's not something that you have to have inherited from anybody. It is completely open to anybody to participate in this, which makes me wonder, why are we vilifying these people? These are people who are self-starters, building our city, taking huge risk, and they deserve to get rewarded for it. On the reward point, the returns on these projects are actually really thin. If you compare it to so many other industries, people who invest in other industries wonder why anybody invests in real estate, because the margins are so thin. The thing is about real estate is that the value of the projects are so large that even though as a percentage it's thin, the actual hard value, nominal value of the profits that come out of it are very large. But on a percentage basis, it's people look at it like, are you crazy? Why would we invest in this? A lot of the time.
Well, even within real estate, if your options are buying built product that's already cash flowing and developing, the gap in those yields is not enough to justify the risk. It's
there you go.
Yeah, so even within real estate, you look at developers and go, you're taking a lot of risk to get it done.
Yeah, a few years ago, we were speaking, I had different conversations with different groups from the Middle East, and they were interested in investing in Canada, and they understand that we have a rule of law here, and we have, we're in the same time zone as New York, which is helpful. We speak English. There's a, proper government. There's no wars on our borders. So they're really interested in it. But then we would speak to them and they'd hear what the returns are. They thought that we were just wrong. What do you mean a 5% yield? Why would anyone do that? But that's because, I don't know, I don't know the Middle East very well, but I'm pretty sure the return expectations are significantly higher. But that's why, here it's even more risky, because what you're pulling out of it afterwards is just not, not that thick.
Isn't there? There's a side irony here that, a lot of these developers, vilified or whatever, are pension funds, life insurance companies, endowment funds. It's the investments of our retirees that are making that return in the first place. It's
police and firefighters and teachers.
It is kind of silly.
But that's also a small part of their overall, their overall pension plan. It's actually pretty small. It's like an alternative investment for them.
Fair, but it's still, they are a lot of the development that's going on are backed by those types of investors. Absolutely. How do you solve it? We've had this conversation before, and I don't know what the answer is, but NIMBYism is a big one. You talked about the politicians, and we've heard anecdotally that a lot of the politicians, well, they will say they're kind of against a development, or they're at least proposing to be difficult offline. They're for development, but their ratepayers are not. And the reality is we've got a strong NIMBYism environment in both Vancouver and Toronto. Adam's got a great story we've brought up a couple of times where his sort of ratepayer community raised a couple $100,000 to fight an extra 3 stories on Bloor on a subway line, right? Incredible amount of vitriol because they did not want that extra couple of
little
floors.
Signs on the lawns, knocking door to door.
Yeah, we've talked about. There's examples like that all over both Toronto and Vancouver. Like, how do you solve that, right? Because you hear people that say, like, yeah, I love development, love immigration, want density, just not at the end of my street.
Yeah. I mean, this is a huge problem. I live in a part of Toronto where I'm seeing exactly that. And it's even funnier than that, because there are I won't say any names, but there are friends of mine who work in real estate, and when a development is coming, adjacent to their property, they're leading the charge and raising money from the community to try and fight it. And it's a little bit of, sucking and blowing at the same time.
I didn't donate anything, for the record. I just want to say that publicly.
Okay, good. One thing that is happening more and more in Toronto, at least, and I know this is a big thing in some of the cities in the U.S., there is now a YIMBY power, and it's growing.
Chris Spoke. We'll put his name out there. He's one of the biggest advocates of that, from Housing Matters.
Yeah.
I think is the name of the company.
Yeah, there's another one in Toronto called MNTO, More Neighbors Toronto, Ontario.
I like it.
And they're from the developer perspective, they're a bit of a double-edged sword. They can be, they're doing the right thing, and they're trying to combat the forces of NIMBY. But they also, they tend to want more affordable housing than we can make work. Again, it's not a greed thing. It's just that if these projects aren't going to hit a certain threshold of profitability, then they're just not going to happen. So, but that is a real force that's happening. I think that elections are a really important thing. And the last municipal election in Toronto, not including the mayor election right now, but the last election really had an impact, because now there's new councillors who seem to get it. Now, they're still new. So 3 years from now, 4 years from now, when they're more scared of getting not reelected, and when they've, learned how to negotiate with developers more, that, that might change. I'm really hoping that it's not going to, because I do think that it has seeped into the public consciousness overall that we need to build more. And, so I think that those things help. I think that, in Toronto, we're going through a mayoral election right now.
Any thoughts on,
I got to be careful. I gotta be careful what I say here in a public forum, because I do represent Colliers. But, I'm concerned about some of the people running. Whereas other ones seem, from the work that I've done with some of them directly, seem to know how to negotiate with developers and understand the importance of it for the city. But, I'm pretty nervous about that, especially in an era when there's a, strong mayor powers, which is something that the province gave to the city of Ottawa and the city of Toronto. Now, what they can give, they can take away. So that'll be interesting to see how the Ford
administration keep it if we like you, right?
Well, look, again, there's lots of things to criticize Doug Ford for, I'm sure. But on the housing front, I really do believe that this government is, listening to all parties, and even though they've, there have definitely been a couple of missteps, overall what they're doing, they are implementing the correct policy that will lead to more development.
Why do city councilors have the authority and the ability to make decisions on development? Why wouldn't it just be an independent committee? They could make decisions based on the general benefit for community and society, not just focused on an elected official's responsibility to the ratepayers of that sort of small neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean,
can they not change that? That seems like the answer, doesn't it? Just get rid of the politics of development.
There are certain cities in Canada that don't have a ward system; they have a at-large system, so that the councillors represent the whole city, not just this one little part of the city. I've heard, I've never lived in that kind of a city. I've dealt with them. I've heard that causes other problems, that relate to development as well. So it's hard to know. The capture of local councillors by the people who already live there and already own homes is a very serious problem in Toronto. Because the people who are going to live there or would love to live there,
voice.
Or the people who are, those buildings, they have no voice.
Well, that's that Housing Matters, and Chris Spoke. I mean, please go back and search it on the podcast. Chris Spoke. It's one of the best episodes or best intel. What's the word I'm looking for? Insight into just the way these types of things are and play themselves out. Because his whole point is for the 100 people that would live in that building that were being discussed, they're not here. They're not represented in those community meetings, right? And so that's kind of the motivating factor.
That's absolutely true. And the other issue is that, it's one of these things where the silent majority isn't saying anything. The people who come out to these,
it's the loudest
community. It's the people who are
squeaky
upset.
wheel, right?
Again, in the area of the city that I live in, I live in Leaside, and we have the LRT that hopefully will open one day. And there's a lot of people that are against the development there, but I have a lot of friends there, and a lot of them are really looking forward to it. We could use a lot more amenities in our area. We could use a lot more restaurants and different stores, and even some bars in the area that aren't just, old school pubs would be great. There's a lot of people who would like to retire and stay in the neighborhood so they can give their house to their kids and they can live in a multifamily. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons for the development along the transit line. I think that there are people who are supportive of it, but you have the opposite as well.
Randy, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today. Your viewpoint on this comes from a real position of studying intelligence. So it's really interesting to hear the, where do we go from here? I don't know. I wonder if we're having the same conversation 10 years from now going, boy, we never built those 1.5 million homes. What a shame. And affordability is still an issue. But either way, people like you out there in the trenches.
Well, I think having these types of conversations on public forums, I think it's all we can do, right? Let's bring the awareness to that there's a real challenge out there.
Yeah.
The only problem we have here is we're speaking to the converted. So people need to get out there and speak to the more mainstream.
If you are a converted and of a community meeting for development in your neighborhood, go to that meeting and be supportive of the development. Get out there and talk to those NIMBYs and try to figure out why they feel the way they are. Just at least give them the ability to hear that there's another side of the story.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, guys.
We want to thank First National for, of course, sponsoring the podcast and for the Real Estate Forums for hosting us here at the Land and Development Conference. Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, guys.